On Christmas Eve, in the year 1848, Clara Hartley stood at the edge of the grandest ballroom in Derbyshire with her bonnet pulled low over her head, hiding what she had done for love. In her trembling hands, there was nothing left to give. She had already given everything. And then she watched it happen. She watched the Duke of Wrexham, the man she had loved in silence for most of her life, take her gift, the small wooden box that had cost her the only beautiful thing she owned in this world, and place it gently into the hands of Lady Diana Fairfax. The whole room applauded. Lady Diana smiled like a cat with cream, pressed the box to her heart, and looked straight across the ballroom at Clara. Only at Clara, and in that look there was victory. Clara felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. But here is what Clara did not know, as she stood there with her heart breaking in front of 200 people. The Duke had no idea what was inside that box. And here is what the Duke did not know. What he had just given away would take him a full year, and one terrible, unforgettable Christmas, to understand. By then, it would very nearly be too late. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. To understand that night, you must first understand the 3 days that came before it. 3 days earlier. Snow had been falling on Wrexham Hall since morning, soft and steady, covering the great stone house like a blessing. Inside, the fires were lit, the halls smelled of pine and orange peel, and the servants hurried about with holly and ribbon, preparing for the Christmas ball that the whole county had been talking about for weeks. And in a small room at the end of the east corridor, not the servants' wing, but not the family rooms either, Clara Hartley sat by her narrow window, mending the hem of her only good dress. Clara was 23 years old, and she belonged nowhere. She was not a servant, she was not family. She was something in between, something without a name, and everyone at Wrexham Hall knew it. Her mother had been the dearest friend of the late Duchess. They had grown up together, 2 girls from the same village, though one married a duke and the other married a poor country doctor. When Clara's parents died of the fever 12 years ago, within a week of each other, the old Duchess had not hesitated for a single moment. She had brought the 11-year-old orphan to Wrexham Hall, kissed her forehead, and said the words Clara would never forget. "You are my goddaughter, and as long as I live, you will always have a home." As long as I live. The Duchess had been gone for 4 years now, and though no one had ever asked Clara to leave, something in the house had changed. The invitations to sit with the family at dinner came less often. The new housekeeper, Mrs. Bramble, had started giving her small tasks, folding linens, arranging flowers, writing letters, tasks one gives to someone who must earn her bread. Clara did them all without complaint. She was grateful. She said so every day. But at night, alone in her narrow room, she sometimes looked in the small, cracked mirror and wondered how long a person could live in a house where she was neither wanted nor unwanted, simply tolerated, like an old chair no one had the heart to throw away. She had no money of her own, no family left, no dowry and therefore no suitors. She had only 2 things in this world. The first was her hair. Oh, her hair! Even the kitchen maid spoke of it. It fell past her waist in thick, shining waves the color of chestnuts in October, her mother's hair, everyone said, the very same. When she brushed it out at night by candlelight, it caught the flame like dark copper. It was the only part of herself Clara ever allowed herself to be proud of, because it was the only part of her mother she had left. The second thing she had was a secret. And the secret was this. Clara Hartley was hopelessly, completely, quietly in love with Nathaniel, the Duke of Wrexham. She had loved him since she was 11 years old, since her very first week at Wrexham Hall, when she had hidden in the library, crying for her dead parents, and a 15-year-old boy with serious gray eyes had found her behind the curtain. He had not laughed at her. He had not called for a maid to take her away. He had simply sat down on the floor beside her, this boy who would one day be a duke, and said, "My mother died when I was 8. It doesn't stop hurting. But I promise you it gets quieter." They had been friends from that day on. Real friends, in the way children can be before the world teaches them about rank and fortune. He taught her to ride. She beat him at chess, and he pretended not to mind. When he went away to school, he wrote to her short, funny letters about terrible food and boring professors, and she kept every single one in a ribbon-tied bundle beneath her mattress, where they remain to this very day. Then his father died, and Nathaniel became the Duke of Wrexham at 24, and everything changed, the way everything always changes. He was 30 now, handsome in a stern, tired way, with those same serious gray eyes and shoulders that carried the weight of 5 estates, 300 tenants, and a mountain of responsibilities. The county mothers threw their daughters at him like roses at a parade. He attended the dinners, danced the dances, said the polite things, and remained, year after year, stubbornly unmarried. To the world he was the Duke, powerful, wealthy, untouchable. But Clara knew things about him that the world did not. She knew that he could not sleep on the nights before the anniversary of his father's death. She knew he hated turnips and hid them under his bread roll like a schoolboy. She knew that when something truly amused him, he didn't laugh out loud. He pressed his lips together and looked down, as if joy were a private thing, not to be shared with just anyone. And she knew about the watch. His father's pocket watch, a heavy gold thing, old-fashioned and scratched, which Nathaniel carried in his waistcoat pocket every single day, even though it had stopped working the very week his father died, and even though it had no chain. The chain had snapped years ago and been lost. A duke could buy 100 gold chains with the coins in his coat pocket, but he never replaced it. He simply carried the watch loose in his pocket, where it could fall and shatter at any moment, as if he were daring the world to take this last piece of his father from him. Once, only once, Clara had asked him why he kept a watch that didn't work. They had been standing in the portrait gallery, under the painting of the old Duke. Nathaniel had turned the watch over in his hand and said quietly, without looking at her, "Time stopped for me the day my father died. I suppose I'm waiting for a reason to wind it again." Clara had never forgotten those words. She thought of them now, sitting by her window with her mending as the snow fell on Wrexham Hall. In 3 days it would be Christmas Eve, the great ball, and on Christmas morning, as was tradition, the household would exchange gifts. Last Christmas, Nathaniel had given her a book of poetry, Wordsworth, her favorite, with a note inside in his own hand, "To my oldest friend." She had traced those words with her finger so many times the ink had begun to fade. And she had given him nothing. She'd had nothing to give. She had embroidered him a handkerchief with his initials, and he had thanked her kindly, warmly even, but a handkerchief. For a man who owned half of Derbyshire, the shame of it still burned in her chest a year later. This year she had promised herself it would be different. This year, perhaps her last year at Wrexham Hall, for Mrs. Bramble had begun making remarks about arrangements and a young woman's future. Clara wanted to give him something real, something that mattered, something that said all the things she would never, ever be allowed to say out loud. She knew exactly what it should be. A chain for his father's watch. A proper silver chain, so the watch could sit safely against his heart where it belonged, and if she could afford it, engraving. She had already composed the words 100 times in her head, lying awake at night. There was only one problem. A silver watch chain with engraving cost at least £4, perhaps 5. Clara Hartley had, in her small tin box beneath the loose floorboard, exactly 11 shillings and 6pence. She had counted it 4 times, as if the coins might multiply out of pity. They did not. 11 shillings and 6pence, not even a quarter of what she needed. She looked out the window at the falling snow, and the church spire of the village beyond the white fields, and she felt the old, familiar helplessness rise in her throat, the helplessness of being poor in a rich man's house. And then she remembered something. She remembered the market day in November when she had walked past the shop of Mr. Pettigrew, the wigmaker, on the high street. She remembered the small card in his window, written in neat black letters. She had barely glanced at it then. But her mind, it seemed, had kept it, word for word. Good hair bought, best prices paid for long, healthy ladies' hair. Inquire within. Clara's hand rose slowly to her head, to the thick braid, heavy and warm, that hung over her shoulder and reached past her waist. Her mother's hair, the last beautiful thing she owned. Her heart began to pound. No asterisk, she thought, surely not. There must be another way. But she was 23 years old, and she had lived long enough to know the truth. For women like her, there was almost never another way. That evening at dusk, a slight figure in a gray cloak slipped out through the kitchen garden of Wrexham Hall and walked the 2 miles into the village, through the falling snow, alone. The high street was nearly empty. The lamps were being lit one by one, and at the far end, past the baker and the bookseller, a warm yellow light glowed in the window of a narrow little shop with a painted sign above the door. EPTTIGREW, WIGMAKER and hair merchant. Clara stood in front of that door for a long, long moment. The snow settled on her shoulders. Her braid hung heavy down her back, hidden beneath her hood, and she could feel her own heartbeat in her throat. She thought of the watch with no chain. She thought of gray eyes, and a boy on a library floor saying, "I promise you, it gets quieter." She thought, he will never know what it cost. That is the whole point of a gift. Then Clara Hartley took a deep breath, pushed open the door and stepped inside. Above her head, a little brass bell rang out into the winter evening, bright and cheerful, like a warning no one heard. The little shop smelled of lavender water and warm wax. Clara stood just inside the door, snow melting on her shoulders, and looked around at a world she had never seen before. Wooden heads lined the shelves, each one wearing a wig, golden curls, silver braids, black ringlets, rows and rows of silent ladies without faces. In the lamplight, they seemed to be watching her. Behind the counter stood a small, round man with spectacles pushed up on his forehead, and a measuring ribbon draped around his neck like a vicar's stole. This was Mr. Pettigrew, a man who had spent 40 years buying and selling the crowning glory of women, and who could tell the weight and worth of a head of hair from across a room. He looked up at Clara. Then his eyes moved to the thick braid escaping from beneath her hood, and Clara saw it happen, saw his gaze sharpen the way a jeweler's does when raw gold walks through his door. "Good evening, miss," he said carefully. "Cold night to be out." Clara's voice had left her somewhere on the dark road from Wrexham Hall. She had to try twice before the words came. "Your card in the window, it says," she swallowed, "it says you buy hair." "That I do, miss." His voice turned gentle. He had done this many times, and he knew what it meant when a young woman in a plain gray cloak came in alone at dusk in December. Nobody sold their hair for a happy reason. Would you be inquiring for yourself? Clara reached up with cold fingers and pushed back her hood. Mr. Pettigrew went very still. The braid fell free down her back, past her waist thick as a ship's rope, shining in the lamplight like polished chestnut, with threads of copper and gold running through the brown. In 40 years, he had seen finer dresses walk into his shop, and finer faces. He had never seen finer hair. "Merciful heavens," he said quietly. He came around the counter, moving slowly, the way one approaches a deer in a field. "May I?" Clara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. He lifted the braid in both hands, feeling the weight of it, and let out a low whistle. "£20 of chestnut if it's an ounce," he murmured, an old hair merchant's expression, for it did not weigh 20 pounds, but it was worth speaking of as if it did. Healthy, uncut, and this color. He shook his head in wonder. "Miss, I'll not lie to you, for my mother raised me honest. There are countesses in London who would pay a fortune to wear this color to the opera. I've had ladies ask me for chestnut with copper lights for 15 years, And I've had to tell them nature makes it rarely and parts with it never. He looked up at her over his spectacles. How much do you need, child? Not how much do you want. He knew better. Women like Clara did not want. They needed. 5 pounds, Clara whispered. It was an enormous sum. It was more money than she had held in her whole life. I need 5 pounds. Mr. Pettigrew was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'll give you 7. Clara's breath caught. 7, sir, you needn't. I'll give you 7, he said firmly, because that is what it's worth to me and because I'd like to sleep soundly on Christmas Eve. He hesitated, and his voice grew kind in a way that nearly undid her. But I'm going to ask you once, miss, the way I'd want a man to ask my own daughter. Are you certain? It's 10 years growing what you're carrying. It doesn't come back by spring. And here for one long moment, Clara wavered. She thought of her mother, brushing this same hair by the fire when Clara was small, singing softly, saying, Your crowning glory, my love. When I'm gone, you'll look in the mirror and there I'll be. Her eyes burned, her hands shook. And then she thought of a gold watch with no chain, carried loose in a pocket over a grieving heart for 6 long years. She thought of a man who had given her a home in his house and a kindness that asked for nothing back. She thought, I have loved him since I was 11 years old and I will never be allowed to say it. Let me say it this once, the only way I can. I'm certain, said Clara Hartley. He sat her in the fitting chair, facing away from the mirror. Better so, miss. Trust an old man. And he unbound the braid with a strange reverence, brushing it out one last time so that it fell around the chair like a cloak of autumn. Then he took up his long silver scissors. Hold still now, child. Clara closed her eyes. The sound, she would remember the sound until she was an old woman. Not a snip, but a slow, heavy asterisk shearing, close to the nape of her neck, like something being harvested. It took him nearly a minute, working carefully, and with every cut Clara felt her head grow lighter, and lighter, until at last there came a moment when the weight she had carried all her life was simply gone. Mr. Pettigrew laid the cut hair on his counter, as gently as one lays down a sleeping child. Clara opened her eyes. She did not look at the counter. She looked straight ahead at the wall, and she said in a voice that only trembled a little, May I have the money, please? He counted 7 pounds into her hand, and then, without a word, he added an extra shilling, closed her fingers over the coins, and patted her hand twice, the way fathers do. Whoever it's for, he said quietly, I hope they know what they're getting. Clara pulled her hood up over her cropped head, thanked him, and stepped out into the snow. They never will, she thought. That's the whole point. The silversmith's shop was 3 doors down, and old Mr. Dunn was just putting up his shutters when Clara knocked on the glass. Perhaps it was something in her face. Perhaps it was simply Christmas. But he opened the door and he listened, and when she told him what she wanted, he brought out his tray of watch chains and laid them on the counter one by one. She knew it the moment she saw it. A silver Albert chain, sturdy and plain and beautiful with a small swivel clasp. A chain made not for show, but for keeping something safe. A chain for a man who had already lost too much. 4 pounds 10, said Mr. Dunn, and the engraving. Clara had carried the words in her heart for so long that they came out in a single breath, as if she'd been holding them since she was 11 years old. To end every hour yours, C. Mr. Dunn wrote it down, glanced up at her once, at the young woman with the shorn head hidden under her hood and the shining eyes, and being a wise old man, he asked no questions at all. Come back tomorrow at noon, miss. It'll be ready. And it was. By the next evening, the chain lay in a small wooden box lined with dark blue velvet, and the box lay wrapped in brown paper beneath the loose floorboard in Clara's room, beside the tin that now held 1 pound, 11 shillings and 6pence, and a bundle of old letters tied with ribbon. For the first time in years, Clara Hartley fell asleep smiling. She should not have. Because we must now go back one day, back to the snowy street outside Mr. Pettigrew's shop. At the very moment Clara stepped out of it with £7 in her pocket and her hood pulled low. For Clara had not been alone on the high street that evening. A fine black carriage had been standing outside the milliner's opposite, its lamps glowing in the dusk. And inside that carriage, waiting while her maid collected a hatbox, sat a young woman in a white fur wrap, with golden hair and the kind of beauty that opens every door in England. Lady Diana Fairfax. Lady Diana, whose father's estate bordered Wrexham land. Lady Diana, who had decided 2 full years ago calmly, the way other people decide on wallpaper, that she would be the next Duchess of Wrexham. Lady Diana, who had noticed with growing irritation that whenever she spoke to the Duke at a dinner or a ball, his eyes had a habit of drifting across the room toward a plain little nobody in a made-over dress. A nobody the Duke called, with a warmth he never gave anyone else, my oldest friend. Diana had been watching that nobody for months, the way a chess player watches the one piece that refuses to behave. And now, through the falling snow, she watched Clara Hartley step out of a wigmaker's shop, hood pulled tight, shoulders strangely light, watched her stop at the silversmith's window, count coins in her palm with cold fingers and go inside. Diana sat very still, thinking. Then she smiled, tapped the carriage window with one gloved finger, and said to her maid, "Betsy, go into that wigmaker's shop. I find myself curious what he's bought today." The maid hurried through the snow. The little brass bell rang once more, and 5 minutes later Betsy returned, wide-eyed, and whispered a report through the carriage window. The most beautiful head of hair Mr. Pettigrew had ever purchased, chestnut with copper lights, long as a bell rope, bought this very hour from a young woman in a gray cloak. Lady Diana Fairfax leaned back against the velvet cushions, and her smile grew slowly, like ice forming on a pond. "How lovely," she said softly. "Go back inside, Betsy. Tell Mr. Pettigrew I'll take it, every strand." She turned her eyes toward the dark road that led to Wrexham Hall, and her voice dropped to a purr. "Tell him I want it made into the finest hairpiece he has ever built, and tell him." She laughed, low and delighted, at whatever thought had just been born behind those lovely blue eyes. "Tell him I shall be wearing it to a ball." On the morning of Christmas Eve, 2 things arrived at Wrexham Hall that would change everything. The first was a letter. It came with the early post, in a plain envelope with no name and no sender, addressed to His Grace the Duke of Wrexham in careful, unfamiliar handwriting. Nathaniel opened it at his breakfast table, expecting a tradesman's bill. What he read instead made the blood drain from his face. "Your Grace, a certain gentleman is in possession of certain letters, written by a certain young lady very dear to you, to a man who is not her husband. It would grieve society terribly to read them in print. You will be contacted again after Christmas regarding the price of silence." There was no signature. Nathaniel read it 3 times. There was only one young lady in the world very dear to him in the way the letter meant, his little sister Charlotte, married just 2 years, sweet and trusting, and the only close family he had left besides his grandmother. Letters. To a man not her husband. It was impossible. It was unthinkable. And yet the cold thing in his stomach whispered, "Scandals do not need to be true to destroy a woman. They only need to be printed." He folded the letter, locked it in his desk, and said nothing to anyone. It was Christmas Eve. 200 guests were coming. He would smile and host and dance. And inside, all evening long, his mind would be far away, turning that letter over and over like a stone in a boot. Remember this, it matters for everything that follows. The second thing to arrive at Wrexham Hall that morning was much smaller. It was a package wrapped in brown paper, carried down the east corridor at dawn by Clara Hartley in her dressing gown, her cropped head bare in the cold morning light, her heart beating like a bird's. In the great hall stood the Christmas tree, a towering fir dressed in candles and glass, in the German fashion the old Duchess had loved. And beneath it, by tradition, the family and household placed their gifts for Christmas morning, each with a small written card. Clara knelt and placed her package deep beneath the branches, where it would be safe. On the card, in her best hand, she had written simply, "For His Grace, from his oldest friend." She stayed kneeling there a moment in the dark and silent hall, with the pine smell all around her. Then she touched the little box once, for luck, and hurried away before the maids came in to light the fires. She did not see the figure standing in the shadows of the gallery above. Betsy, Lady Diana's maid, had been sent to the hall that morning with a basket of hothouse flowers, a neighborly Christmas gesture from the Fairfax estate. That was the official reason. Her actual instructions had been quite different. "Watch the girl," Diana had said, drawing on her gloves. "She sold the finest hair in 3 counties for ready money at Christmas. Whatever she bought with it, she bought for him. I want to know what, and I want to know where." Betsy watched Clara rise and slip away. Then she came down the gallery stairs on quiet feet, knelt beneath the tree, and found the little package with its careful card. She hesitated. Betsy always hesitated. There was a conscience in her buried shallow. But wages were wages, and her lady frightened her far more than her conscience did. She swapped Clara's card for the one Diana had prepared, tucked the original into her apron, and slipped the package into her flower basket. By 10 o'clock that morning, Clara's gift, the chain that had cost her mother's hair, was sitting on Lady Diana Fairfax's dressing table. Diana turned the package over in her white hands, reading the little card that came with it, and laughed out loud. She did not even open it. She didn't need to. Whatever was inside, its power lay not in what it was, but in who would be watching when it changed hands. "Wrap it again, Betsy," she said, "in silver paper and lace ribbon." The Christmas Eve ball at Wrexham Hall was the finest anyone could remember. 200 candles, an orchestra from London, the great and the grand of 3 counties pouring through the doors in silk and jewels, their breath steaming, their carriages queued half a mile down the drive in the falling snow. And at the edge of it all, against the wall by the tall windows, stood Clara Hartley. She wore her only good dress, the grey silk, made over yet again with new ribbon at the sleeves that had cost her 6pence of her remaining money. And on her head, hiding what was left of her hair, she wore a fine lace cap, the kind married ladies and companions wore. A few of the county ladies glanced at it, puzzled, a cap at her age. But Clara had prepared her answer. A chill, a small fever, doctor's orders. Nobody cared enough to ask twice. She did not expect to dance. She expected only one moment, and she had been living on the thought of it for 3 days. Tomorrow morning, Christmas morning, when the household gathered around the tree, Nathaniel would open a small box. He would lift out a silver chain. He would read 5 words, and he would look up, and whatever his face did in that moment, whatever it showed or didn't show, Clara would have it to keep for the rest of her life. That was all she wanted, one look. It did not seem too much to ask. Across the ballroom, Nathaniel stood surrounded by guests, nodding at conversations he did not hear. The letter in his locked desk sat on his chest like a stone. Twice he glanced across the room and found Clara by the windows, and both times something in him settled a little, the way it always did. There she is, though if you had asked him what that feeling was called, he could not have told you. He noticed the lace cap and thought vaguely that she looked pale. He resolved to ask after her health. Later. When his head was quieter. Later never came. Because at 9 o'clock, between the second dance and the third, Lady Diana Fairfax made her move. She had timed it perfectly, the orchestra resting, the crowd gathered thick near the great tree, champagne in every hand. She glided up to the Duke in ice blue satin, took his arm as if she owned it, and said, in a voice pitched precisely loud enough to carry, "Your Grace, you are a wicked, wicked man." The nearby conversations hushed deliciously. Nathaniel blinked down at her. "I beg your pardon, Lady Diana." "Oh, don't play the innocent." She laughed like sleigh bells and turned to the crowd. "Do you know what I discovered under the tree this evening? A gift addressed to me, hidden away beneath the branches as if His Grace hoped no one would see it before Christmas." She produced, from her maid's hands behind her, a small box wrapped in silver paper and lace ribbon, and held it up to the candlelight. And everyone knows a gift from the Duke of Wrexham cannot simply be handed over like a parcel of fish. It must be presented asterisk properly. The crowd laughed and murmured. Somebody called out, "Present it, Your Grace." Glasses were raised. The orchestra leader, sensing an occasion, lifted his bow and held it, waiting. Nathaniel stood very still, his mind racing. He had ordered no gift for Diana Fairfax. He was almost certain he had ordered no gift for Diana Fairfax, and yet his secretary handled a dozen such courtesies every Christmas, gifts for neighbors and notables, and his head had been so full of that poisonous letter all day that he honestly could not swear to it. To say, "I know nothing of this" in front of 200 people would be to call a lady a liar at his own ball, on Christmas Eve, with 3 counties watching. He was a duke. He had been raised from the cradle on one commandment above all others: never make a scene. And so Nathaniel did the polite thing, the gracious thing, the catastrophic thing. He smiled, took the little box from Diana's hands, and presented it back to her with a shallow bow, while the crowd applauded and the orchestra struck up a flourish. "Lady Diana," he said, "with the compliments of the season." By the windows, Clara hardly stopped breathing. She knew the box. Silver paper and lace could not disguise it. She knew its size, its weight, its little wooden corners, the way a mother knows her child at any distance, in any clothing. That was her box. That was her chain. That was her mother's hair and 5 words engraved in silver, and everything she had ever felt and never said in Diana Fairfax's hands, to the sound of 200 people applauding. The room swayed. She gripped the windowsill behind her. "There is a mistake," she thought wildly. "A mix-up the cards, the tree, I'll explain, he'll laugh, we'll." And that was the moment Lady Diana, pressing the box to her heart, looked across the whole width of the ballroom, found Clara's eyes and smiled. It was a small smile, nobody else even saw it, but it said as clearly as if she had shouted it, "I know exactly what this is, and now it is mine. I shall treasure it," Diana announced to the room, "and open it Christmas morning as one ought." She turned her glowing face up to the Duke. "Though I confess I am dying to know what's inside." "You are the only one who is," thought Nathaniel, bowing again, already desperate to be done with the moment. But Diana was not done. Diana was never done. "But Your Grace, how selfish of me," she cried, turning theatrically. "You have gifts for half the household, I'm sure, and here I am hoarding the occasion. Why?" And her eyes traveled, slow and deliberate, across the ballroom to the figure by the windows. "I believe I even saw a little something with Miss Hartley's name on it. Your oldest friend must not be forgotten on Christmas Eve." Heads turned. 200 faces found Clara against the wall. Nathaniel brightened genuinely, for the first time that whole cursed evening. Here at last was something he actually wanted to do. He had chosen Clara's gift himself, weeks ago, with more care than he would ever have admitted, and Diana's mischief-making had just handed him the chance to give it in a way that honored her in front of everyone. In his distracted, letter-poisoned mind, this seemed like a kindness. "Quite right," he said, and beckoned to a footman. "The green box." He crossed the ballroom to Clara himself, the crowd parting before him, and Clara watched him come the way one watches a wave that cannot be outrun. "Miss Hartley," said the Duke of Wrexham warmly in front of everyone, "Happy Christmas." Inside the green box, on a bed of white silk, lay a pair of combs. Tortoiseshell combs, inlaid with tiny silver flowers, combs made by a London craftsman from a drawing the Duke himself had approved, shaped and sized for one purpose in all the world: to hold up the heaviest, most beautiful chestnut hair in Derbyshire. "I noticed you only ever wear plain pins," Nathaniel said, quieter now just for her, with that pressed lip almost smile she knew better than anyone. That seemed a great injustice to the finest thing in this county. A soft asterisk ah ran through the watching crowd. Somebody clapped, and Lady Diana Fairfax, gliding up behind the Duke with her eyes shining like a cat's at a mouse hole, said sweetly, "Well, Miss Hartley, won't you try them? Take off that cap, dear, let us see them the way His Grace intended." Clara stood frozen, the combs burning in her hands. I mustn't, I've been unwell, the cold." "Nonsense, it's warm as toast in here." Diana's voice was honey over steel, and she was already reaching out, playful as a sister, laughing her sleigh bell laugh. "Come, it's Christmas, off with it." Her fingers caught the edge of the lace. "Diana," the Duke began. The cap came away. The orchestra chose that exact moment to end its flourish. And so it happened in silence, total, crystal silence. That 200 of the finest people in 3 counties beheld Clara Hartley's shorn head, cropped close like a fever patient or a workhouse girl, the ragged little tufts of chestnut standing up in the candlelight where 20 pounds of glory used to be. For one heartbeat, nobody made a sound. Then from somewhere in the crowd, a woman laughed, shocked, high, quickly smothered, but too late it was loose, and titters ran around the ballroom like fire through dry grass. Fans came up over mouths. Whispers boiled. Her hair, good heavens, her hair, sold it, do you think? How much? To whom? Why? Nathaniel stood 2 feet away, the empty green box still in his hand, staring at the ruin of the most beautiful thing he had ever known, and understanding absolutely nothing. "Clara," he said, "not Miss Hartley asterisk, just her name, horse, stripped of every title. Clara, who did this to you?" And Clara looked up at him, at his horrified gray eyes, at Diana glowing beside him with the silver box pressed to her heart, at 200 laughing strangers, at the whole smoking wreck of the only dream she had ever allowed herself. And she did the only thing left to do. She pushed the combs back into his hands, and she ran. Out of the ballroom, through the great hall, past the towering tree with its empty place beneath the branches, out the front doors and down the steps into the snow, bareheaded, while behind her the whispers rose and rose. "Clara." Nathaniel reached the top of the steps and stopped. Hosts cannot vanish from their own balls. Dukes do not chase women into snowstorms. 200 people were watching him through the doorway. A poisoned letter sat in his desk. Never make a scene, a lifetime of chains, every one of them invisible, held him on that top step like iron. The snow fell thick and silent. Her small footprints were already filling in. He stood there a long moment, a pair of tortoiseshell combs clenched in his fist, staring into the dark where she had gone. And behind him, in the golden light of the ballroom, Lady Diana Fairfax took a glass of champagne from a passing tray and drank, very slowly, to herself. Gossip in the countryside travels faster than any mail coach, and gossip with Lady Diana Fairfax behind it traveled faster still, because Diana did not merely spread stories. She bred asterisk them. By Christmas afternoon, every drawing room in the county had heard about the scene at Wrexham Hall. By St. Stephen's Day, the story had grown teeth. "Did you hear? The Hartley girl, the Duke's little charity case, sold her hair. Yes, sold it like a workhouse woman. For debts, they say. Debts. What debts could a girl like that have, living free under the Duke's own roof?" And then dropped gently into a dozen teacups by Diana herself, with a sorrowful little shake of her golden head. Of course, one hates to think it, but when a young woman needs money suddenly, secretly, at Christmas, money she cannot ask her guardian for, there is usually a man in it somewhere. Or worse, poor creature, one pities her truly. She never said more than that. She never had to. A seed like that, planted in good soil, grows all by itself. Within 3 days, Clara Hartley, who in her whole life had never owed a shilling or kissed a man, had become, in the mouths of the county, asterisk that unfortunate girl at the hall, the one with the debts, the one with the man, the one the poor Duke has been harboring all these years without knowing what she was. The whispers reached Wrexham Hall through the servants' corridors, as whispers always do. Mrs. Bramble, the housekeeper, began looking at Clara the way one looks at a stain on good carpet. The maids went quiet when she entered a room. Even the footmen's eyes slid past her. Clara bore it the way she had borne everything for 12 years, in silence, with her chin up and her hands steady. But at night, in her narrow room, she sat on the edge of her bed and understood with a clear and terrible calm that it was over. Not because of the laughter, not even because of the lies, but because of the one thing she could not endure. Sooner or later, someone would say it to his asterisk face. Someone would smirk and say you're Miss Hartley in that tone, and she would see it land in his gray eyes doubt or pity, or worst of all, embarrassment. She had loved him since she was 11 years old. She would scrub floors in a workhouse before she would become an embarrassment to him. And her gift, her mother's hair, her 5 engraved words sat in Diana Fairfax's house. There was no undoing it, no explaining it that did not end in more laughter. Please, your grace, the gift Lady Diana has was actually mine, bought with my hair, engraved with mine no. Impossible. Every road out of this ended with her heart displayed on a table for the county to poke at. There was only one door left, and Clara had already found the key to it. Among the guests at the ball, before everything happened, she had overheard a conversation. A Mrs. Ashworth, of Harrogate in Yorkshire, complaining loudly that her late sister's children were running wild, that governesses were impossible to find at any price, that she would take any respectable young woman who could spell and play the pianoforte, sight unseen, tomorrow. On the morning of the 27th of December, Clara wrote to Mrs. Ashworth, offering herself. On the 30th, the answer came by return post. Come at once. Wages paid quarterly. A seat on the Northern Mail coach leaves the White Hart at 5 o'clock in the morning. New Year's Eve was her last night at Wrexham Hall. She packed her whole life into one carpet bag. 2 dresses, her mother's Bible, the tin box with £1 and some shillings, and the ribbon-tied bundle of a boy's letters from school, which she told herself she was keeping only because burning them seemed dramatic. Then she sat down at her little table to write the farewell letter. Your Grace, she began. She stopped, crossed it out. Dear Nathaniel, crossed that out too. She had not called him that aloud in 10 years. She had no right to it on paper. She tried again and again. The candle burned down while the crumpled papers grew around her feet like snowdrifts, because the truth was this: there was no version of the letter that worked. If she explained about the hair and the chain and the swapped gift, the letter became a confession of love, and a confession of love from a penniless nobody to a duke was not a gift. It was a burden, one he would carry with guilt for the rest of his life. And if she explained nothing, then what was there to say? Thank you for 12 years. Goodbye, cold as a tradesman's bill after everything. Some letters cannot be written. This was one of them. At 4 o'clock in the morning, on the first day of the new year, Clara Hartley stood a final moment in the dark great hall, beneath the Christmas tree with its guttered candles. She looked up the staircase, toward the corridor where he slept. Every hour, she whispered to no one, yours, whether you ever know it or not. Then she pulled her hood over her shorn head, went out through the kitchen garden, and walked 2 miles through the dark to the White Hart, where the Northern Mail coach stood steaming in the lantern light. By sunrise she was gone. Nathaniel learned of it at breakfast, from Mrs. Bramble, who delivered the news with her hands folded and her face carefully blank. Miss Hartley's room is cleared, your grace. She left in the night, no word to anyone, a pause precisely measured. She took the Northern coach, the stable boy says. The Duke of Wrexham set down his cup very slowly. For 3 days, while duty and 200 guests and that poisonous letter had eaten his every waking hour, he had been telling himself, when the house is empty, I will sit down with Clara and untangle all of it. The hair, the cap, the look on her face, all of it. He had rehearsed the conversation in his head a dozen times, in the reasonable, orderly way he arranged everything in his life. And while he rehearsed, she had packed a bag and vanished into the dark, without a word, without a asterisk line asterisk. After 12 years, after libraries and chessboards and every letter he had ever written her from school, she had not thought him worth a single sheet of paper. Did she leave nothing? His voice came out flat. No note, nothing. Nothing, Your Grace. Something in Nathaniel's chest. Something that had been standing wide open for 12 years without his ever noticing it, quietly closed. Hurt is a strange thing in a proud man. It cannot simply be felt. It must be converted into something more dignified, and the nearest coin at hand is always anger. By nightfall, Nathaniel had convinced himself of a whole architecture of reasonable conclusions. That the county's whispers must contain some grain of truth after all, that there had been secrets in his house, that whatever trouble Clara Hartley was in, she had chosen flight over trusting him. And that a woman who could do that had perhaps never been the friend he imagined. He was wrong in every particular, but wounded pride is a masterful lawyer, and it argued its false case in his head every night for months. He did not go after her. He told himself a duke could not go chasing a runaway companion across England like a character in a cheap novel. And besides, there was the blackmail letter, and Charlotte to protect, and estates and duties. He told himself many things. And every single day, this he could not explain, and hated, his hand still went to his waistcoat pocket, to the dead gold watch that lay there loose and chainless, exactly as it had for 6 years. Now we must visit one more room before this chapter closes. Fairfax House, Christmas morning days earlier, while Clara still lay sleepless at Wrexham Hall. Lady Diana Fairfax sat at her dressing table in a silk robe, and before her lay the little box, silver paper and lace ribbon and all. She had waited to open it, exactly as she'd announced, not from honor, but because anticipation for Diana was the better part of any pleasure. She untied the ribbon, lifted the lid. On dark blue velvet lay a silver watch chain, sturdy, plain, unmistakably a asterisk man's asterisk chain, and in an instant Diana understood whom it had been made for, because all the county knew the famous story of the Duke's broken watch. Her lip curled. A watch chain. The little fool sold her hair for a watch chain. Then she turned it in the light, and saw the engraving. To end every hour yours, see asterisk. Diana went very still. She read it twice, and then alone in her room where no audience required it, Lady Diana Fairfax laughed. But this laugh was not sleigh bells. It was low and slow, and it did not reach her eyes at all, because she was not laughing at the sentiment. She was measuring the threat. Every hour yours. 10 years growing, sold in an evening for 5 words on silver. Diana had spent 2 years and a fortune in gowns trying to catch the Duke of Wrexham's attention, and had never once seen his eyes go soft. This shabby little nobody could summon that softness across a crowded ballroom by asterisk standing near a window. And now this. This was not a rival's move. Rivals Diana could crush. This was something far more dangerous. This was proof that the girl loved him. Real love, the kind that sells its hair. And if a thing like this ever reached the Duke's hands, if he ever read these 5 words and understood what they had cost. Diana looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. Then she coiled the chain neatly back into its box, carried it to her writing desk, placed it in the bottom drawer beneath a false stack of correspondence, turned the little brass key, and dropped the key into her jewel case. There, she said pleasantly to her own reflection, every hour asterisk mine. She would not destroy it. Destroying it never even occurred to her, and that, as we shall see, was the one mistake in an otherwise perfect crime. Diana Fairfax kept trophies. She kept them the way generals keep captured flags. In the doorway behind her, unnoticed, stood Betsy with the morning chocolate tray, Betsy, who had seen the engraving over her lady's shoulder in the mirror. Betsy, in whose apron pocket, folded small as a sin, still lay a little card in careful handwriting. For his grace, from his oldest friend. She had been ordered to burn it days ago. She had not. Betsy set down the tray with trembling hands, bobbed a curtsy, and hurried out. And the little card stayed where it was over her heart, ticking away quietly like a watch that someday, somehow, someone was going to wind. The second blackmail letter arrived in the middle of January, as promised. This time it named a price. £8,000, Your Grace, and the letters are yours to burn. Refuse, and they go to the London papers by Easter. You will find we are patient, but not infinitely so. A friend to the family. £8,000. A staggering sum, but that was not what made Nathaniel's hands cold. What made his hands cold was the small folded page enclosed with the demand. A copy, the blackmailer wrote, asterisk of one page among many. It was a love letter, a foolish, breathless, damning love letter, addressed to a man Nathaniel knew by reputation, Sir Henry Locksley, a married London charmer with a poet's tongue and a gambler's soul. And it was signed in a girlish looping hand, asterisk your own C.W. Charlotte Wrexham, his sister's initials, his sister's handwriting, the very slant of it, the little curl on the capital C that she had made since the schoolroom. Nathaniel rode through the night to Charlotte's house in the next county, and put the page in her hands, and watched his sweet, silly, utterly good-hearted little sister turn white as the paper itself. Nathaniel, I swear to you, I swear on Mama's grave I never wrote this. I've met Sir Henry twice in my life at crowded parties with my husband at my elbow, her voice cracked. But this looks like, how can an asterisk look like my hand? Who could? And then she stopped and asked the question that would poison the next 6 months. Nathaniel, who will believe me? That was the whole devilry of it. The letters did not need to be real. Charlotte's marriage was young. Her husband's family was proud and cold. Society forgave men everything and women nothing. If those pages reached print, the truth would arrive too late, limping years behind the scandal. Charlotte would be ruined not for what she had done, but for what could be asterisk made to look done. Nathaniel hired a discreet inquiry agent in London. The agent found nothing. The letters were held by a gentleman abroad. The go-between was a hired solicitor's clerk who knew nothing. The trail dissolved like sugar in rain. Paying was madness. Blackmailers who are paid always return. Refusing was Charlotte's destruction. For 2 months, the Duke of Wrexham lived inside that trap, and told no one, and grew gray and grim. While the county murmured that his grace had not been the same since Christmas, and wasn't it odd? And did it have anything to do with asterisk that girl, the one who ran off? And then in March, on a wet gray afternoon, Lady Diana Fairfax came to call and sprang the trap's second jaw. She was shown into the library, lovely and grave, no sleigh bell laughter today. She sat, refused tea, and folded her white hands. Your Grace, I am about to be unforgivably forward, and I beg you to hear me to the end. She took a breath, a picture of reluctant courage. There is talk in London. My cousin Frederick, you know what he is. He swims in every gutter in town. My cousin has heard that certain letters exist, concerning a lady very close to you. Nathaniel went absolutely still. Go on. He knows the men who hold them. Dreadful people, but people who deal, Your Grace, with people they trust. They will never sell to you. You'd bring the law down on them the moment the letters were burned, and they know it. They will never sell to a stranger. She looked up, blue eyes wide and steady. But they would deal with Frederick, and Frederick would do it for family. The word hung in the room like smoke. For family, Nathaniel repeated slowly. If I were to ask him as his cousin on behalf of she lowered her lashes, of a family I was soon to belong to, he would fetch those letters within a month, and your sister's name would be safe forever. If I ask him as a mere neighbor, she spread her hands, helpless. Frederick risks a great deal in such a transaction. He would want to know it was worth it, that it was asterisk kin. There it was, wrapped in silk, tied with sympathy, delivered with downcast eyes, but Nathaniel had negotiated with hard men over land and money all his adult life, and he knew a price when he heard one. Marry me, and your sister is saved. And the monstrous thing, the thing that kept him standing at his window until 3 in the morning for many nights after, was that he could not prove the trap was a trap. Perhaps Diana was exactly what she appeared, a well-connected woman fond of him, offering the only help in England that could reach those letters. Perhaps. His instincts howled otherwise. But instincts were not proof, and Easter was 7 weeks away, and Charlotte's face, who will believe me, hung before him every sleepless night. A man with no good choices will eventually convince himself that the least unbearable one is wisdom. "I will consider what you've said, Lady Diana," said the Duke of Wrexham in a voice like a door closing. "You are very kind." Diana rose, curtsied, and did not smile until her carriage had cleared the gates. 200 miles north, in a tall, cold house outside Harrogate, Clara Hartley was teaching 3 wild children their letters, and discovering, to her own surprise, that she was not unhappy. Oh, it was hard. Mrs. Ashworth was a fretful, complaining employer. The schoolroom fire was never quite enough. The wages were small and quarterly and mostly promises. But the children, Tom and Louisa and little Ned, who had lost their mother and been handed about like unwanted parcels. The children had taken one look at the quiet new governess with the cropped hair and the sad, kind eyes, and adopted her the way strays adopt each other. Her hair was growing back. It curled now around her ears and neck, soft and stubborn, and little Ned liked to pat it and announce, "Like a asterisk sheep asterisk, Miss Hartley," which was the closest thing to a compliment anyone had paid her in months, and which the first time made her laugh until she had to sit down. It was the first time she had laughed since Christmas Eve. She did not allow herself to think about Derbyshire. That is to say, she thought about it every single day, at dusk usually, and then firmly put it away, the way one puts away a dead woman's dress folded with lavender, in a drawer one does not open. She knew nothing of blackmail, or letters, or traps closing. The county gossip of Derbyshire did not reach a Yorkshire schoolroom. But something else was beginning to reach her, slowly, methodically, twice a week, like a man building a wall. Mr. Josiah Crane owned the neighboring estate and half the wool trade in the district. He was 41 years old, a widower of many years, tall and spare and gray-eyed in a wintry way, a man who spoke rarely, wasted nothing, and had never in living memory done anything impulsive. He dined with Mrs. Ashworth on Sundays and Thursdays. And for some weeks now, Mr. Crane had been watching the new governess. Not warmly, Mr. Crane did nothing warmly. He watched her the way he inspected fleeces or ledgers, thoroughly, patiently, checking for flaws. He observed that she was educated, even-tempered, honest to a fault with the household accounts Mrs. Ashworth had shoved onto her, and that the children, whom he privately considered savages, had become almost civilized in her care. He observed that she never spoke of her past, never flirted, never complained. He observed, in short, that Miss Hartley was asterisk sound, the highest word of praise in Josiah Crane's vocabulary. And Josiah Crane had lately been thinking that a sound wife was a thing a sensible man of 41 ought to acquire, the way one acquires a good roof before winter. He began, in his wintry way, to court her. Clara did not even recognize it as courtship for the first month, a book lent, a word of practical advice about the chilblains on little Ned's hands, an umbrella silently held over her head from church door to carriage. There was nothing of love in any of it, and Clara knew there never would be. But there was something else in it, something that whispered to a penniless woman with no family in the cold hours, safety, a house of your own, a name, an end to being tolerated. Clara pushed the whisper away. The whisper was patient, it could wait. And now, at last, We come to the finest character in this story, though she would box our ears for saying so. Lady Augusta Wrexham, the Duke's grandmother, was 81 years old, weighed less than a wolfhound, and was afraid of absolutely nothing on this earth except boredom. She lived in the dower house across the park, attended by a companion she terrorized and a butler she adored, and she missed nothing, nothing, that happened within 20 miles. She had watched the Christmas Eve ball from her chair by the fire, and what she had seen had not amused her. She had seen the Fairfax girl produce a gift with the timing of a professional actress. She had seen her grandson's face during the applause, the face of a man being maneuvered. She had seen the cap come off poor Clara Hartley's head, and she had seen this above all where the girl had been looking the instant before she fled, not at the laughing crowd, at Nathaniel, only entirely at Nathaniel. Old women who have loved and buried a husband know that look across any ballroom in Europe. Since then, Augusta had watched from her dower house as the whole business curdled. Clara vanished north. Her grandson turned gray and silent and started locking his study, and the Fairfax chit began appearing at Wrexham Hall with the quiet regularity of a debt collector. Augusta had known Diana Fairfax's grandmother, a grasping woman who had cheated at whist for 40 years, and held firmly to the view that blood tells. "Something is rotten," she informed her butler Simmons one April morning apropos of nothing over her egg. "My grandson does not look at that woman, Simmons, not once. A man about to propose looks at a woman with love, or at least with appetite. Nathaniel looks at her the way one looks at a hangman, and yet he is going to offer for her. I can smell it coming like weather in my knees. Why?" "I could not say, my lady." "No one can say. That is precisely what is wrong. When no one can say anything, everyone is hiding something." She rapped the table. "Very well. If the mountain will not confide in his grandmother shall go digging. We begin where all this nonsense began, Simmons, with the only truly interesting question of last Christmas, which every fool in the county gossiped about and no one troubled to actually answer." "And what question is that, my lady?" Lady Augusta set down her spoon, and her old eyes glittered like frost. "Why does a good, proud, sensible girl sell the most beautiful hair in Derbyshire 3 days before Christmas, and to whom did the wigmaker sell it afterward?" She pushed back her chair. "Fetch my furs and the small carriage. We are going into the village, Simmons. I find myself in sudden and desperate need." She smiled, and 81 years fell off her face. "Of a wig." Mr. Pettigrew, the wigmaker, had faced many formidable things across his counter in 40 years of trade. He had never faced anything like Lady Augusta Wrexham. She arrived in a cloud of ancient furs, planted herself in his fitting chair like a small conquering army, and spent a full hour trying on wigs she had no intention of buying, silver ones, powdered ones, one towering construction that made her look, she declared with satisfaction, like a mad French queen, Simmons. We shall take note of it for the next funeral I am forced to attend. And all the while, gently, expertly, she talked about trade, about winters, about how hard it must be to find really fine hair these days. "Oh, it's rare as rubies, my lady," sighed Mr. Pettigrew, entirely disarmed. "Once in a career, maybe, something truly fine walks through that door." "Once in a career," repeated Lady Augusta, admiring herself in the glass. "And when did it last walk through yours?" "December, my lady, just before Christmas." His voice went reverent. "Chestnut with copper lights long as a bell rope. 20 pounds of chestnut, I called it, never seen its like." "Extraordinary. Bought from some farmer's wife, I suppose." "Oh no, my lady, a young gentlewoman, quality though her cloak was plain." He shook his head sadly. "Came in at dusk, all alone, needing 5 pounds. I gave her 7. It broke my heart to cut it, if I'm honest, but she was set on it. Set as a stone." "A young gentlewoman needing 5 pounds 3 days before Christmas," murmured Augusta. "How curious. Needed it for debts, one imagines. ribbons, some foolishness. And Mr. Pettigrew, bless the man, he had been wanting to say this to somebody for 4 months, ever since the county gossip had reached even his shop and made him grind his teeth. Mr. Pettigrew drew himself up. "Begging your pardon, my lady, but I'll not have it said. I know what they whisper about that girl, and it's wicked nonsense. Debts. A man in it. I watched her walk out of this shop with her £7 and go straight asterisk down the street. I watched through that very window straight into Dunn the silversmith's, not 2 minutes later, and spent nearly the whole of it there. What manner of scarlet woman sells her crowning glory and spends it at a asterisk silversmith's before her head's even cold?" Lady Augusta became very interested in a hatpin. A silversmith's. Well, trinkets for herself then, earrings, a bracelet. "A watch chain," said Mr. Pettigrew, triumphant. "Dunn told me himself over a pint at the White Hart, after the whole county started wagging about her. A gentleman's silver watch chain, my lady, finest Albert he had in the shop with an engraving ordered on it. Paid £4.10 of her 7, and Dunn said," he leaned forward, "Dunn said she gave him the words for the engraving from memory, all in one breath, like a prayer she'd been saying for years." The shop was quiet a moment. In the glass, rows of faceless wooden ladies looked on. "And the words," said Augusta softly. "Ah, that Dunn wouldn't tell, my lady. Wouldn't tell me and won't tell you. He's churchwarden proud about his customers' engravings, is Dunn. Between her and God and whoever wears it," he said. Mr. Pettigrew polished his spectacles. "But he told me this much. He said in 50 years of cutting words into silver, that was the only time he ever wanted to weep while he worked." Lady Augusta sat quite still in her chair, doing sums in her head, and the sums were terrible and simple. A girl with nothing. A gentleman's watch chain. Everyone in the county knew whose famous gold watch had hung chainless over whose grieving heart for 6 years. And 3 days later, on Christmas Eve, that same girl had stood in a ballroom and watched a silver-wrapped box pass from Nathaniel's hands into. Augusta's blood ran cold, then very hot. "One last thing, Mr. Pettigrew," she said, rising, pulling on her gloves finger by finger, her voice sweet as arsenic. "The hair itself. 20 pounds of chestnut once in a career. You'd have sold it on quickly, a treasure like that. To whom?" And here Mr. Pettigrew hesitated, because tradesmen do not name clients. But Lady Augusta Wrexham turned her eyes upon him. 81 years of aristocratic willpower in a small fur-wrapped package. And Mr. Pettigrew heard himself say, helplessly, like a man in a dream, "Lady Diana Fairfax, my lady, that very evening, sent her maid in for it before the shears were cool, paid triple and ordered it made up into the finest hairpiece I ever built." He swallowed. "I delivered it to Fairfax House in February. She was very particular that it be ready before the spring ball." The Countess of Selborne's spring ball was the first great gathering of the season, and everyone who mattered was there, including the Duke of Wrexham, grim and dutiful, and his grandmother, who had insisted on attending with a sudden enthusiasm that should have made everyone suspicious, and Lady Diana Fairfax, who arrived late, deliberately, gorgeously late. She came up the great staircase in gold silk, and a murmur rolled through the ballroom ahead of her like a bow wave, because Lady Diana, famous for her golden curls, had transformed. Her hair was dressed high and full in a crown of rich, gleaming chestnut, threaded with copper lights that caught every candle in the room, cascading in 2 long shining curls over one white shoulder. It was the most magnificent head of hair the county had ever seen. It was, of course, not hers. Everyone knew great ladies wore hairpieces. Nobody thought a thing of it. 3 women asked her outright for the name of her coiffeur. "A little indulgence," Diana laughed, sleigh bells ringing. "From London." Across the room, Nathaniel turned to see what the murmuring was about, and the world went strange. He could not have said why. That was the horror of it. He looked at Diana Fairfax's beautiful new hair, and something deep beneath his thoughts, something older than thinking, rose up like a hand reaching out of dark water. His skin went cold. The ballroom noise receded oddly, as if he dived under a wave. Chestnut with copper lights. He had seen that color 1,000 times. In firelight, bent over a chessboard, 12 moves from losing and refusing to surrender. In June's sun, coming loose from its pins at the gallop, streaming like a banner. On a crying 11-year-old behind a library curtain, the first afternoon of his life he ever felt useful to another human being. It is a coincidence, he told himself. Brown hair is brown hair. You are tired. You are trapped and grieving and losing your mind by inches, and now you are seeing ghosts in a woman's coiffure. Then Diana was before him, curtsying, radiant, and the orchestra was striking up, and there was nothing on earth to do but dance. It was the longest dance of Nathaniel's life. She talked. He answered. His eyes kept dragging back to that shining chestnut crown 6 inches from his face. At the turn, a curl of it swung against his sleeve and he flinched as if burned. Close to, in the candlelight, the copper lights moved in it exactly the way. "You're pale, your grace," Diana said, watching him from under her lashes. There was something in her eyes he had never seen there before, some bright secret pleasure like a child at a keyhole. "Is anything the matter?" "Nothing," said Nathaniel, a chill. He got through it. He bowed, delivered her to her circle of admirers, walked straight through the ballroom, and stood on the cold terrace gripping the balustrade like a seasick man, furious with himself and shaking, unable to name the thing that was wrong because the truth was a thought his mind refused on principle to think. He did not have to refuse it much longer. "Nathaniel," his grandmother's voice behind him, quiet, and Augusta was never quiet. "Take me home. Now, please. There is something you must hear tonight, and you cannot hear it in this house." She told him in the Dower House library by the fire, plainly and in order, sparing him nothing. The wigmaker, the dusk, the 7 pounds. The silversmith 2 minutes later. A gentleman's silver watch chain, 4 pounds 10, engraved with words given from memory, in one breath, like a prayer said for years. The only time in 50 years he ever wanted to weep while he worked. Nathaniel stood through all of it, white and motionless, one hand resting on the mantel. And when she came to the end, to who had bought the hair that same evening, before the shears were cool, and had it built into a crown, and been very particular asterisk to have it ready for tonight, she watched her grandson's hand close slowly around the edge of the marble until his knuckles stood out like a dead man's. "The box," he said at last. His voice came out wrong, rusted. "On Christmas Eve. The one she made me give her in front of everyone. In front of," he stopped. He was seeing it again, a girl by the windows gripping the sill. Grandmother and grandson looked at each other and neither said the words because the words did not need saying. "It was for you. It was always for you. And you put it in Diana Fairfax's hands to the sound of applause." "I never ordered a gift for Diana Fairfax," he said slowly, dragging each fact into the light like a man hauling wreckage. "I doubted myself that night. My head was full of, I had other troubles. But I never ordered it, which means she asterisked it, which means she took it or had it taken, which means she knew what it was and whose it was, and she stood there and made a public theater of it while—" He broke off. When he spoke again, his voice was very soft, and Augusta, who had known him all his life, had never heard it sound like that. "And Clara stood by the window and watched me do it. And 3 days later the whole county was calling her a kept woman. And I believed she'd abandoned asterisk me." He was out the door before Augusta could rise from her chair. He rode to Fairfax House through the dark, ball or no ball, hour or no hour, and was standing in the hall when Diana returned at 2 in the morning, still crowned in chestnut and copper, flushed with champagne and triumph, and the flush died on her face at the sight of him. "The box I gave you at Christmas," said the Duke of Wrexham, without greeting, without preamble, in a voice like February. "I want it, now." For once in her charmed life, Diana's wits scrambled. "Your Grace, what a strange hour for the little Christmas box. Oh, but And then her instincts caught up and chose, fatally, the only door available. I lost it, ages ago. Careless of me, I never even opened it. You know how the season is. It must have been thrown out with the wrappings. You lost it. I lost it. Her chin came up. The hair gleamed on her head between them, and she saw where his eyes went. And for one naked moment, something flickered across Lady Diana Fairfax's lovely face that looked almost like fear. "Then there is nothing more to say tonight," said Nathaniel, with terrifying courtesy, and bowed and walked out. "But there is one more scene in this chapter, and it is the one that matters most." 3 o'clock in the morning, Wrexham Hall. Nathaniel sat sleepless in his study, a single lamp burning, the anonymous letters spread before him, and none of it mattering any more, when there came a sound at the window. A tap, then another. He opened it to a small, terrified figure in a servant's cloak, on foot, mud to the knees, a girl he vaguely recognized as Lady Diana's maid, shaking so hard she could barely speak, holding out something wrapped in a handkerchief as if it burned her. "Betsy, your grace, please, I was never here. She'll destroy it now, see, after tonight, after you asked, first thing tomorrow it goes in the fire. I heard her say so. And I couldn't, I've done wicked things, your grace. I swapped the cards under your tree, she made me. I've had it on my soul 4 months, and I couldn't carry it another step." She pushed the little bundle into his hands, and pulled from her apron a small worn card, folded soft with handling. This too. This was the true card. "I was ordered to burn it. I couldn't do that neither." And she fled into the dark. Nathaniel stood alone in the lamplight. He unfolded the card first. For his grace. From his oldest friend. The careful hand he knew from 100 schoolroom notes and chess match wagers, from a bundle of letters he did not know was tied in ribbon 200 miles north of where he stood. Then he unwrapped the handkerchief, and the silver chain slid cold into his palm, sturdy, plain, beautiful, made for keeping something safe, made for one watch in all the world. He turned it to the lamp with hands that were not steady, and read what a girl with nothing had paid for with the last beautiful thing she owned. "To end every hour yours, see asterisk." The Duke of Wrexham sat down slowly in his chair. He read the 5 words again, and again. Then he took his father's dead gold watch out of his waistcoat pocket, laid it on the desk beside the chain that had been made for it, put his face into his hands. And for the first time since the day his father died, 6 years and a lifetime ago, Nathaniel wept. Outside the study window, somewhere far to the north, it began very softly to rain. Nathaniel did not sleep that night. By dawn he had made 3 decisions, and he made them the way he did everything, thoroughly and in order. First, he would find Clara Hartley, wherever in England she was, and put the chain in her hands and say, well. He did not know yet what he would say. He only knew that a man who had let a woman sell her hair for him, be laughed at for him, be slandered for him, and walk out into the snow alone for him, did not get to compose his speech in advance. He would kneel in her doorway if it came to that. Dukes did not kneel. He found, examining his heart that morning, that he could not care less what dukes did. Second, he would destroy the blackmail, not pay it, not endure it, destroy asterisk it, because he now understood something about it that had escaped him for 4 months. He had spent the night rereading those anonymous letters with new eyes, and the new eyes saw a pattern. Every letter had arrived at a moment that drove him toward one door, and standing in that door, wide-eyed and helpful, was always the same golden-haired woman. He could not prove it yet. But he had stopped believing in coincidences at approximately 3 o'clock that morning, with a silver chain in his fist. Third, he would deal with Lady Diana Fairfax, carefully, legally, completely. He was still drafting instructions for his London agent when the third decision walked up the drive and knocked, in the form of his own butler bearing the morning papers, with an expression on his face that Nathaniel would remember for the rest of his life. "Your Grace, page 4. I am your Grace, I am very sorry." There it was, in the finest type the county paper possessed, nestled among the season's engagements, dignified as a tombstone. A marriage has been arranged and will shortly take place between His Grace the Duke of Wrexham Hall, and Lady Diana Fairfax, only daughter of the Earl of Fairfax. The happy intelligence has been received with universal delight in the county. The London papers had it by the following morning. Diana had placed it in 5 of them. It was, Nathaniel had to admit, standing rigid in his study with the newsprint shaking in his hand, a masterstroke vicious, brilliant, and very nearly unanswerable. She had bolted the door from the outside. A gentleman could not publicly deny an engagement without branding the lady a liar and himself a scoundrel. The scandal would bury them both, and Wrexham men had eaten scandal avoidance with their porridge for 300 years. And if he denied it anyway, if he chose scorched earth, she still held Charlotte over him. The false letters would be in print within the week, time to look like the vengeance of a jilted woman's family, his sister's ruin as the price of his freedom. "You will marry me," said page 4 in its dignified little voice, "or I will burn everything you love, and society will hand me the matches." His grandmother arrived within the hour, newspaper under her arm like a dueling pistol. "You will not asterisk," she announced from the doorway. "No," Nathaniel agreed quietly. "I will not, but grandmother, I cannot say so. Not yet. Not until Charlotte is safe. The moment those letters are ash, Diana Fairfax has no hostage, and then—" his voice went soft in the way that had frightened her by the fire, "then we shall discuss page 4. And in the meantime, the whole world believes you betrothed, including," Augusta stopped, "including a governess in Yorkshire, wherever Yorkshire had hidden her." "Then I must find her before the world does," said Nathaniel. But the world, as it always is, was faster. He hunted her with everything money and method could buy. 2 inquiry agents in the north within the week, but 200 miles away, in a tall cold house outside Harrogate that advertised nowhere and registered with no agency. A governess who had arrived through nothing but an overheard conversation went on teaching 3 children their letters, invisible as only a poor woman can be, while agents combed the registries of York and Leeds for a trail that did not exist. May came. In the walled garden behind Mrs. Ashworth's house, the apple trees blossomed, and Clara Hartley sat on a bench in the spring sun mending Ned's eternally torn stockings while the children shrieked around the lawn. Her hair reached her collar now, curling and rebellious. She had decided she was as close to contentment as her life was likely to come. It seemed wisest not to examine the question too often. Mrs. Ashworth took 3 London papers, chiefly for the society pages, which she read aloud at breakfast in a tone of devout resentment. On the 3rd morning of May, between the kedgeree and the marmalade, Mrs. Ashworth cleared her throat and read, "A marriage has been arranged, and will shortly take place, between His Grace the Duke of Wrexham." The schoolroom teapot was a heavy brown thing, and Clara was holding it, and afterwards she never understood how she did not drop it. She set it down. Some part of her, the part that had poured tea through 12 years of being invisible in fine rooms, set it down gently, turned the handle neatly to the right, and folded her hands in her lap while the rest of her fell and fell and fell. "And Lady Diana Fairfax, only daughter of the Earl of Fairfax. The happy intelligence has been received with universal delight, Wrexham," said Mrs. Ashworth, lowering the paper. "Derbyshire, is that not? You were in Derbyshire, Miss Hartley. Did you ever see him, the Duke? They say he is very handsome and very cold." "Once or twice," said Clara. Her voice came out perfectly level. It astonished her. "At a distance. Ned, love, your elbow is in the butter." And that was all. She taught the morning lessons. She corrected Louis's French verbs. She walked the children to the beck and back in the afternoon and answered their chatter, and no one in that house saw anything at all except perhaps little Ned, who slipped his hand into hers on the walk home without being asked, and held on the whole way, frowning fiercely at nothing, the way children do when they know a thing they have no words for. It was only that night, alone by one candle, that Clara opened the drawer. The dress she had folded away, the whole dead Derbyshire life, with its libraries and chessboards and grey eyes, she took it out one last time because some things must be looked at squarely before they can be buried. She had known. Of course she had known. She had always known. Girls like her did not marry dukes, and dukes married women like Diana Fairfax, and the world was the world. Hope had never been reasonable. But hope does not require reason, only air, and hers had lived on in its drawer all these months, breathing quietly, waiting. She saw it plainly now, waiting for something that was never coming. The happy intelligence has been received with universal delight. So, Clara said softly, to the candle, to the drawer, to 11 years old behind a library curtain. There it is, then. She did not weep for very long. She was too practiced. But when it was over, something in her face had changed, and it did not change back. A certain door, standing open since childhood, had swung shut at last, and Clara herself had shut it. Mr. Crane, dining at the house that Thursday, observed that Miss Hartley was quieter than usual and paler, and that she listened to his account of the summer wool prices with a new and complete attention, as if she were memorizing the terms of something. Mr. Crane was a patient man. He noted it in the ledger of his mind and moved his plans forward by one season. He proposed on the second Sunday of November in Mrs. Ashworth's cold front parlor, with the fire unlit because Mrs. Ashworth economized on Sundays, and he did it exactly the way he did everything, without one wasted word. Miss Hartley, I am 41. I have 1,100 acres, a sound house, no debts and no poetry in me. I'll not insult you by pretending otherwise. I do not offer you love. I offer you a home that is yours, a name that is respected, an end to other people's children and other people's charity. You would want for nothing and answer to no one. He paused, and something almost human crossed the wintry gray of his eyes. I have watched you a full year. You are the soundest person I ever met, man or woman. I believe we should deal very honestly together, and honest dealing wears better than love. That is my whole case. He stood before her, hat in his two hands, and waited. And Clara looked at him and saw it all, clear as figures in a column. The firelit house, the servants who would call her Madam Asterisk, the winters without fear, the springs without shame. Never again a lace cap in a ballroom. Never again a locked drawer with a life folded inside it. Everything, in short, that the sensible world called a triumph for a woman like her. Not love, but not hunger either. She heard herself say from somewhere rather far away, "You honor me, Mr. Crane. May I such a step deserves a considered answer, not a hasty one. Will you allow me until Christmas?" Mr. Crane bowed. If he was disappointed, no instrument then invented could have detected it. "Christmas," he agreed. "That is sound." He put on his hat, and at the parlor door he turned. "I'll ask only this, Miss Hartley. When you consider what is asterisk, not what might have been. I've bought wool futures 30 years. Might have been is the only stock that always fails." He left. Clara stood alone in the cold parlor, listening to his gig rattle away down the frozen lane, and it seemed to her that she could actually feel it. The great iron machinery of a sensible life, closing around her, gently, comfortably, forever. Consider what is. What was asterisk was this. The Duke of Wrexham was marrying Lady Diana Fairfax, and a woman who had already sold her hair for a dream did not get to refuse a roof for one. "I will give him his answer at Christmas," Clara told the empty parlor, and upstairs in her room, in the drawer that was shut now, a ribbon-tied bundle of a boy's old letters lay in the dark and heard the sentence passed. 200 miles south, on that same gray November Sunday, the Duke of Wrexham stood in his study before a wall of maps and agents' reports. 5 months of nothing, Leeds and York and Harrogate, registry offices and church rolls and mail coach ledgers, asterisk nothing, and his grandmother sat by the fire watching him wear the carpet thin. On the desk, in an open box of dark blue velvet, lay a silver chain he had not let out of his sight since March. Beside it, a gold watch that did not tick. "She is somewhere, Nathaniel," said Lady Augusta quietly. "England is only so large." "So is winter," said the Duke. He stopped at the window. Outside, the first snow of the year was beginning to fall on Derbyshire, soft and steady, covering the park like a blessing or a shroud. "It's November, grandmother. I promised myself I'd find her before." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. On the mantel, the calendar said what it said. Christmas was coming, again. Every lie, however beautiful, has a seam in it somewhere. The seam in Diana Fairfax's masterpiece was made of paper. It was found in the last week of November, in a cluttered room off Chancery Lane, by a small ink-stained gentleman named Mr. Tembley, a man who had spent 30 years examining disputed documents for the courts of England, and who now sat with the blackmailers, copied page, under a great brass magnifying lens, while the Duke of Wrexham stood over him like a thundercloud in a good coat. "Curious," murmured Mr. Tembley. "Very curious indeed." "Curious how?" "Well, your grace, firstly the hand. It is a fine imitation, a truly *devoted imitation of the lady's writing you've given me for comparison, but look here at the long strokes." He beckoned the Duke down to the lens. "Genuine writing flows your grace. The pen moves at the speed of thought, but a forger does not write, a forger draws, slowly, copying. And slowness leaves a tremor in the line, do you see? Tiny hesitations, like a man walking a rope. This whole page trembles. Your sister's true hand runs like water. This ran like a thief in the dark. Would that convince a court, a jury?" "It would convince your grace, but juries like things they can hold, so." Mr. Tembley smiled the smile of a craftsman saving his best joint for last and held the page up against the lamp. "Let us give them something to hold. This letter is dated, you'll observe, in the lady's supposed hand, June 1844, 5.5 years ago. Now look at the paper itself against the light. There, the watermark." Faint in the glow, ghost white in the weave of the paper, Nathaniel made out a design, a crowned rose, and beneath it letters. HWILLCOX and Son. "Wilcox and Son, your grace, are papermakers in Kent. Good firm, young firm." Mr. Tembley laid the page down flat and delivered the blow with the quiet relish of his profession. "They founded their mill 3 years ago, which presents your blackmailer with an embarrassing difficulty, for it seems the lady contrived to write her love letter in the summer of 1844, on paper that would not exist until 1847. A miracle, your grace." He folded his spectacles. "And the courts, in my experience, are terribly skeptical of miracles." For a long moment, the Duke of Wrexham stood absolutely still. Then he let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since January. "Mr. Tembley," he said, "I could embrace you." "A written report will suffice, your grace. I charge extra for embraces." The forgery proven, the rest unraveled like cheap knitting. Because a conspiracy is only as strong as its most frightened member, and the most frightened member of this one was Frederick Fairfax. Diana's cousin Frederick was a beautiful ruin of a man, 30 years old, charming as spring and rotten as autumn, and drowning the Duke's agent established within a week in gambling debts to half the clubs in London. The scheme had been simple. Frederick provided the London machinery, the hired clerk, the gentleman abroad who did not exist. Diana provided the brains, the patience, and the pen. She had been celebrated. It emerged, even in the schoolroom, for a wicked gift of copying hands, forging her governess's signature at 14 with such perfection that the poor woman doubted her own memory. And samples of Charlotte's writing had been the easiest part of all. 3 years of parish charity committees, where the ladies of the county exchanged notes weekly, and Lady Diana Fairfax kept everything. The Duke did not go to the law, not yet. The law was a bludgeon. He needed a scalpel because Charlotte's name must never touch a courtroom. Instead, he did a quieter, colder thing, Over 10 days in early December, through agents and intermediaries, he bought Frederick Fairfax's debts. All of them. Every marker, every note of hand, every whispered obligation from every club and moneylender in London. Until one snowy evening, Frederick was invited to a private room at his own club and found sitting there, behind a table stacked with the paper ruins of his life, the Duke of Wrexham. "Good evening, Mr. Fairfax," said Nathaniel pleasantly. "I believe I am now your largest creditor. In point of fact, I believe I am your only asterisk creditor. Sit down." Frederick sat. He held out for nearly a quarter of an hour, which was longer than anyone expected. Then he wrote out in his own true, trembling hand a full confession. The scheme's every gear and screw, his cousin Diana its author and forger, the false letters her work, the timing of each anonymous demand planned by her to the day. She said we need only frighten him toward the church door, Freddie. He'll walk through it himself, signed, dated, witnessed by the Duke's solicitor. In exchange, his debts held in suspension and a one-way passage, sailing in January, to make his fortune or his grave in the colonies. He surrendered the false letters, too, the whole poisoned bundle. Nathaniel read not one line of them. He counted the pages against Frederick's sworn inventory, sealed them in oilskin, and locked them in his strongbox as evidence, on top of Mr. Tembley's report and beneath a silver watch chain, which even now went everywhere he did. Charlotte, when he told her, wept on his neck for 10 full minutes and then, being sweeter than her brother but every inch a Wrexham, dried her eyes and said, "Nathaniel, you will destroy her." "No," said Lady Augusta from her chair by the fire before he could answer, and the old lady's voice was velvet over iron. "He will let her destroy herself. It is tidier and it lasts longer. And besides," she drew from her reticule a letter of her own, arrived that morning from one of the innumerable ancient countesses with whom she had been exchanging poison and gossip for 60 years. "I have been doing a little needlework of my own." Would anyone care to hear what the Dowager Lady Marchwood remembers about Diana Fairfax and the summer of 1841, when the young lady was but 17, and got as far as the second inn on the Great North Road, at midnight, in a hired chaise, with a certain half-pay cavalry officer, before her father's men caught them 12 hours short of Gretna Green? Silence of the very best quality. It was bought quiet, of course. The officer was paid off to Ireland, the innkeeper pensioned, the story buried. Augusta folded the letter with the satisfaction of a duelist folding away a pistol. But Lady Marchwood's late husband held the officer's note of hand, and Lady Marchwood, God preserve her wicked old heart, never throws anything away. The world may forgive a scheming beauty many things, children. But society will never, never, forgive being made a fool of by a woman it was told was spotless. Let her stand in a ballroom while that comes out, and no drawing room in England will receive her again. Nathaniel looked around the fire at his sister, safe, at his grandmother, terrible and magnificent, at the strongbox that held Diana Fairfax's whole edifice in ashes waiting to happen, and asked the only question left. "Then everything is in hand, except the one thing that matters." His voice dropped. "It is the 18th of December, grandmother, and I still cannot find her." And Lady Augusta Wrexham smiled, the smile of a woman who has been saving the best for last her entire life. "Ah," she said, "as to that, sit down, my boy, and let me tell you what else old women write to each other. Lady Marchwood has a cousin in York, and the cousin in York has a neighbor, a tiresome, boasting creature called Mrs. Ashworth of Harrogate, who has spent this autumn crowing to the whole West Riding about her paragon of a governess. A quiet gentlewoman out of Derbyshire, if you please, wonderful with children, keeps to herself. And mark this, Nathaniel, the cousin writes that the poor young lady arrived last New Year with her hair cropped short as a convict's. Some illness, Mrs. Ashworth supposes." Augusta paused, and delivered it like a trump card kissing the table. "Her name, they say, is Miss Hartley." Nathaniel was already standing, already reaching for the bell. "The roads north are closing," Augusta warned, though her eyes were blazing like a girl's. "There's snow from here to Scotland, Christmas snow. Nothing sensible travels in it." "Then it's as well," said the Duke of Wrexham, from the doorway, in a voice she had not heard from him in 7 years. The voice of the boy who used to jump the east hedge on a horse too big for him, laughing, "that I am done being sensible." He was gone within 2 hours, in the fast-traveling chaise with the best 4 horses in his stable, north into the falling dark. But before he left, he did one last piece of business. He wrote a letter, short, courteous, and annihilating, addressed to Lady Diana Fairfax. It enclosed copies: Mr. Tembley's report, Frederick's confession in a hand she would know was genuine, having so often admired her own imitations of others, and one line from a dowager's letter regarding the Great North Road, the second inn, and the summer of 1841. The letter itself said only this: "Madam, you will discover from the enclosed that your cousin has made a full accounting of your enterprise, and that certain other chapters of your history are known to me. There will be no marriage. You will announce the dissolution of the engagement yourself, in whatever terms you can bear, before the new year. If you do not, I will announce it for you at Lady Selborne's New Year's ball, with documents before 300 witnesses. The choice of executioner is the only choice I leave you. WRXHAM." Diana Fairfax read it standing in her morning room on the 19th of December, and those who served in Fairfax House said afterward that the sound she made was not weeping, and was not screaming, but was somehow worse than either. Then she stood quite still for a long time at the window looking north, where the snow was coming down like the end of the world, thinking, because Diana Fairfax was many wicked things, but she had never once in her life been slow, and a drowning woman with 1 card left does not fold. She rang for Betsy, whom she did not know had already betrayed her. Betsy, white as the snow outside, and said, in a voice like cracked porcelain, "Pack a small trunk, cold weather things. We are going north, Betsy, to Yorkshire." She smiled at the window, and the window would have shivered if it could. "I find I should like to meet a governess." The Duke's chaise fought north for 4 days. Drifts to the axles past Sheffield. A dead halt at Leeds, half a day digging. His coachman begged him twice to stop and waited out at an inn, and twice the man in the chaise, wrapped in his greatcoat with one hand closed in his pocket around a small box of dark blue velvet, said only, "Drive on." On the afternoon of the 23rd of December, the very anniversary, though he did not know it, of a dusk when a girl in a grey cloak had stood outside a wigmaker's door gathering her courage, the chaise came at last up a frozen lane outside Harrogate, to a tall cold house with lit windows glowing gold against the blue snowdark. Nathaniel did not wait for the steps. He was down and through the gate and across the buried garden with the snow to his knees, rehearsing nothing, hoping everything, 12 years and 200 miles and 1 silver chain from the only door in England that mattered. When he passed the tall parlor window and looked through it, and stopped as if he had been shot. The parlor was warm with firelight, and in the firelight in the middle of the room stood Clara, thinner, her hair curling soft and short about her face, so exactly herself that his heart turned over, and before Clara, holding out his open hand, stood a tall, spare, gray man Nathaniel had never seen in his life. In the man's open palm, catching the firelight plain as ruin, a gold ring. The man was speaking. Clara's head was bowed, and as Nathaniel stood rooted in the snow with his own ring box in his frozen fist, he saw Clara Hartley slowly lift her hand toward Mr. Josiah Crane's. Every clock in the world stopped at once. I am too late. But now we must step inside that firelit parlor, because windows, as the Duke of Wrexham was about to learn, show everything except the truth. Mr. Crane had returned for his answer 2 days early, being a man who saw no virtue in suspense. He had set the ring on his open palm, his mother's ring, gold and plain and good, and made his closing argument in 11 words. "Well, Miss Hartley, Christmas is nearly here. What is your answer?" And Clara had bowed her head and looked at the ring, and seen the whole warm, safe, sensible rest of her life lying in that broad, honest palm. Then she lifted her hand, the hand Nathaniel saw rise from the snow-dark garden, and laid it over Mr. Crane's, and gently, finally, folded his fingers closed around the ring. "No," said Clara Hartley, "and I must tell you why, because you have dealt honestly with me from the first, and you shall have honesty back. You offered me a fair bargain, Mr. Crane, everything you named, in exchange for a sound wife. But I am not sound. I have a flaw in me, sir, an old one, all the way through, like a crack in a bell. I love a man I will never see again, who is marrying someone else, and I have loved him since I was 11 years old, and it does not stop. I thought I could bring you honest dealing at least, but a wife who rings cracked every time you strike her is not honest dealing. It is counterfeit, and you deserve better coin." There was a long silence. The fire ticked. Said Mr. Crane at last. He looked at the ring in his closed fist, then at her, and something moved behind the wintry gray of his eyes that might in a warmer man have been called respect, or even distantly sorrow. "I told you might have been is the only stock that always fails. I ought to have remembered the corollary, Miss Hartley. Never bid on stock that is already owned." He rose and put on his hat. "He is a fool, your man in Derbyshire. I hope he chokes on his wedding cake. Good night." And it was at that precise moment, with Clara's hand still lifted, and Mr. Crane turning for the door, that the front bell of Mrs. Ashworth's house rang as if the ringer meant to pull it out of the wall. What happened next, Mrs. Ashworth would retell for the remaining 20 years of her life, growing less coherent with joy at every telling. The parlor door, the maid's squeak, and then filling the doorway, white to the knees with snow, a wild-eyed, travel-ruined, 4 days unshaven man whom Mr. Crane, sizing him up in one long Yorkshire glance, gathering his coat, and permitting himself the single joke of his adult life, passed on the threshold with a nod and the words, "Derbyshire, I take it. She's just told me all about you. Mind the crack in the bell, it's load-bearing." And then the door closed, and there was firelight, and there they stood, Clara Hartley and the Duke of Wrexham, alone in a cold parlor in Yorkshire, 1 year and 1 lifetime after a ballroom, staring at each other across 6 feet of carpet that might as well have been the English Channel. "You," Clara heard herself say idiotically at last, "you are in Harrogate." "I am in Harrogate," Nathaniel agreed hoarsely. "I have been in Harrogate for 4 minutes. It took me 364 days to get here, Clara. I would have been faster, but I am." His voice cracked clean down the middle. "I am the greatest fool who ever wore a coronet, and fools travel slowly." And then it all came out of him. No order, no dignity, no dukedom left in it anywhere the whole year in a torrent. That he had never ordered any gift for Diana Fairfax, the swapped cards under the tree, Betsy at his window at 3 in the morning, the blackmail, his sister, the trap and the breaking of the trap, 5 months of agents combing the north for a woman invisible as only a poor woman can be. He told it standing, then pacing, then finally standing very still, and he ended it the only way it could end, by drawing from his pocket a small box of dark blue velvet, worn now at the corners from 10 months of travel in a pocket over a heart, and opening it, and holding it out across the 6 feet of carpet. The chain lay shining in the firelight, every hour yours. "I know what it cost," said Nathaniel very low. "I know the day and the shop and the £7 and the £20 of chestnut. I know you walked out of Pettigrew straight to the silversmith's with your head cold in December. And I know that I stood on my own steps in my own doorway and let you run into the snow, because I have spent my whole life being careful, Clara, and being careful has cost me the only thing." He stopped, steadied. "I am not here to be careful. Say the word and I'll leave and never trouble you again. But I have carried your 5 words next to a broken watch for 10 months, and I've come 200 miles through the worst snow in 20 years to give you 5 of mine. So here they are." He said them. "Every hour, mine were yours too." Now Clara Hartley had endured in the space of 1 year public humiliation, slander, exile, poverty, and the death of hope, all without breaking, all with her chin up and the teapot set down gently. She had been strong for so long and so completely that she had forgotten strength was a thing being spent, not a thing she was made of. 5 words broke her like a dry stick. She cried at last, the whole year of it, standing in the middle of the carpet with her hands over her face. And Nathaniel crossed the 6 feet of channel in one stride, and then his arms were around her and her cheek was against the cold, snow-damp wool of his coat, over the pocket where the watch was. And if you had listened very closely in that parlor, you would have heard her saying, muffled and furious and weeping, "A year, a whole year, you gave it to her in front of me, Nathaniel, in front of everyone, and they laughed." And you would have heard him saying into her cropped curls, over and over, wretched and useless and human, "I know, I know, I know." They had 12 years to repair and 1 evening to begin it in, and they were still at it past midnight, by the dying fire, talking, accusing, forgiving, laughing once or twice through it in the wrung-out way people laugh after weeping, when Mrs. Ashworth, who had been listening at the door for 5 hours in a state of religious ecstasy, finally drove them apart with candles and propriety. Nathaniel took rooms at the inn in Harrogate, and in the morning he came back formally, hat in hand, and asked Clara Hartley to return south, with his grandmother as chaperone and her own choices as her own, for the new year. "There is one piece of business left," he said. "You needn't be there for it, but I think you have earned the seeing of it." "What business?" The Duke of Wrexham smiled, and it was not entirely a nice smile. "House cleaning." But Diana got to Yorkshire first. She arrived the next afternoon, the 25th of December, Christmas Day, for the devil keeps no calendar, while Nathaniel was at the inn writing letters. She came in furs, magnificent and pale, and she found Clara alone in the schoolroom, and she shut the door behind her and came straight to the point, because a drowning woman wastes no breath. "He has broken with me, you'll know that by now. He thinks he holds all the cards, confessions, paper, tremors in the ink." Diana's laugh had no bells left in it, it rattled. "But understand this, Miss Hartley. I have 1 card left, and it is you. If he exposes me, I shall spend my last hour in society telling a better story than his, that you were his mistress all along, under his own roof from a girl, that the hair, the money, the running north at midnight, all of it was a fallen woman's tale, that he shamed me at the altar's edge for you. I have made stories stick to you before with less. Marry him, and every drawing-room in England will smile behind its fans at the Duchess of Wrexham for the rest of her life. Your children will hear it in their nursery. That is my card." She leaned close, and her lovely face was a mask with something desperate moving behind the eye-holes. "So here is my price. Refuse him, vanish, and I take my ruin quietly, and your name stays clean. You've given things up for his good before, haven't you? It's the one thing everyone says of you. Be a saint one last time." It was, as final cards go, a shrewd one. It was aimed with terrible accuracy at the exact center of Clara Hartley, at 12 years of self-erasure, at the girl who could not even write a farewell letter for fear of burdening him. And 1 year earlier it would have worked. But the woman standing in that schoolroom was not that girl anymore. That girl had been spent, sheared off at the nape one December dusk, and sold across a counter. And what had grown back in her place was shorter and plainer, and very much harder to frighten. Clara looked at Lady Diana Fairfax for a long, quiet moment, and then she said, gently, almost kindly, "You are threatening the wrong woman, my lady. Look at me. I have already been laughed at by 200 people in a lit ballroom. I have already been called a kept woman in every drawing-room in Derbyshire by you, while I ate my breakfast 200 miles away and could answer nothing. I have already lost my hair, my home, my good name, and my hope, and I am still standing here teaching children their letters. You are offering to take from me things I have already survived losing." She opened the schoolroom door and stood aside with perfect courtesy. "Tell your story, Lady Diana. Tell it loudly. But you should know that people who fight over a scrap of shade have no power over someone who has lived through the whole eclipse. Good day, and happy Christmas." Diana stood very still. For the first time in her gilded life, she had played a card and watched it simply fail. Something flickered across her face that was almost bewilderment. The bewilderment of a wolf meeting the one sheep that does not run. "New Year's, then," she said at last, at the door in a voice like frost on glass. "Lady Selborne's ball. We shall see whose story the world believes." "Yes," said Clara, "we shall." Lady Selborne's New Year's Eve ball in her great house outside Derby was the most glittering crush of the season, 400 guests, half the peerage of the Midlands, and an electric hum of expectation. For everyone had read page 4 in its time, everyone had heard whispers of a rupture, and both parties were rumored to be attending. Society smells blood the way sharks do. Diana came early and came armed, radiant in white and diamonds, playing the brave wounded dove, and by 10 o'clock she had begun seating the room, corner by corner, fan by fan, with her better story. Poor Miss Hartley, the Duke's little companion, one hardly likes to say it aloud. Under his own roof, my dears, for years, and I nearly married into it blind. She was halfway through her third telling when the doors were announced, and the room turned and went silent. The Duke of Wrexham came in with his grandmother on one arm, and on the other, in a gown of deep green silk with her short chestnut curls dressed in tiny white roses, her chin exactly as high as it had been over 12 years of lace caps and hand-me-downs, Miss Clara Hartley. And across the dead-silent ballroom, before 400 of the finest people in England, the Duke did what he had failed to do on his own steps 1 year before. He made a scene. "Lady Selborne, friends, forgive me. Before the dancing I find I owe this county 2 corrections, and I have learned this year the cost of postponing them." His voice carried to the chandeliers. He had the strongbox documents in his breast pocket and had never needed anything less. The room itself had become his witness stand. "The first correction. There is not, and never was, any engagement between myself and Lady Diana Fairfax. What there was this." And then, piece by piece, calmly, devastatingly, while the crowd's silence grew teeth, the anonymous letters read aloud. Mr. Tembley's finding, a love letter of 1844, written on paper that would not exist until 1847 asterisk, which drew an audible gasp and one shout of appalled laughter. Frederick Fairfax's sworn confession, in his own hand, naming its architect. She said we need only frighten him toward the church door, at which 400 heads turned as one, like a field of wheat, toward a woman in white and diamonds who had gone the color of her gown. The sworn statement of a lady's maid regarding 2 swapped cards under a Christmas tree. The ledger of Mr. Pettigrew, wigmaker, and here Nathaniel's voice changed, dropped, went through the room like a low bell, recording the sale, 3 days before last Christmas, of the most beautiful head of hair in Derbyshire by a young gentlewoman who needed £5, and the testimony of Dunn the silversmith as to what she bought with it, engraved for whom. "You all laughed," said the Duke of Wrexham quietly, into the ringing silence, and he did not have to say when. "So did I not defend her, which is worse. The kept woman of your gossip sold the only treasure she had to buy a chain for a dead man's watch, for a fool who handed her heart to a thief in front of 200 people, because the thief had planned it that way." He drew it from his pocket then and held it up, and the silver caught the light of every chandelier. "It is engraved, if anyone still doubts. To N, every hour yours. I am N, I have nothing in 5 estates worth half of it." The room's silence broke like a dam, into uproar, into 100 hissing fans, into the peculiar rising sound of society devouring one of its own. And through it came Lady Augusta Wrexham's voice, old and clear and merciless, delivering, to a Lady Marchwood conveniently seated beside her, the coup de grace, pitched to carry. "But my dear, none of it should surprise anyone who recalls the summer of '41, the Great North Road, and a certain half-pay officer. You *remember Constance." The second in. Lady Marchwood, 79 and enjoying herself immensely, remembered at length. They say the Earl of Fairfax aged 10 years in 10 minutes, and led his daughter out through the frozen garden rather than pass back through that ballroom. At the terrace door, Diana turned one last time, white in diamonds and ruin, and looked for Clara across the sea of turned backs. And Clara, who alone in that room did not turn her back, met her eyes and gave her a small, grave nod, the kind one gives at funerals. Then the doors closed on Lady Diana Fairfax, and England, as Augusta had promised, never received her again. They did not stay for the dancing. They drove home through the snow-hushed dark to Wrexham Hall, the three of them, Augusta asleep and smiling in her furs. And it was 1:15 when Nathaniel led Clara, "Come. There's something I must show you. It cannot wait for morning," into the great hall, where the servants had raised and lit the Christmas tree as in the old Duchess's day, all candles and glass, filling the dark with small gold fires. The great clock in the hall stood at 3 minutes to midnight, 3 minutes to the new year, when the Duke of Wrexham knelt down beneath the tree, in the very place where a girl in a dressing gown had once hidden a brown paper package at dawn, and touched it for luck and looked up at her and said, "12 years ago you hid behind a curtain in my library, and I have been yours since that afternoon and was too careful ever to know it. You gave me every hour. I am asking for the rest of them." He opened his hand. His mother's ring lay on the palm, and his voice went to pieces entirely, and he let it. "Clara, marry me." Out in the frozen dark, across the sleeping county, the church bells of the village began to ring the new year in. And Clara Hartley, who had once stood at the edge of this very hall with nothing left to give, knelt down in the candlelight to meet him, took his face in both her hands, and gave him his answer with the bells. They could have married in April. Lady Augusta campaigned loudly for April. Charlotte drew up lists for June. The county, cheated of a ducal wedding for a decade, would have turned out for any Tuesday in Lent. Clara chose Christmas Eve. "It took the worst day of my life," she said simply when Nathaniel asked her why, "and I find I want it back." So they waited out the year, a year of banns and bridges mended, of Clara learning to be looked at in drawing rooms that had once whispered about her, with Augusta beside her like an elderly falcon daring anyone to try it. And on the following Christmas Eve, 1 year to the day after a man stood frozen at a Yorkshire window, and 2 years to the day after a girl walked into a wigmaker's shop at dusk, the bells of the village church below Wrexham Hall began to ring at 10 o'clock in the morning, and did not stop for an hour. It was not a grand wedding. That was the second thing Clara had insisted on. 400 glittering guests had watched her worst moment. She did not need them at her best. The little stone church held 60, and every seat was full of people who mattered. Charlotte sat in the front pew with her husband, already crying before anything had happened. Lady Augusta sat beside her, upright as a mast, in the towering silver wig she had once tried on for a joke in a village shop. She had gone back and bought it, for the next funeral, and then decided a wedding would do, and holding in her lap, because she trusted no footman with it, a small box of dark blue velvet. Behind them, Mrs. Ashworth of Harrogate in her best purple, weeping magnificently at a wedding she would claim for 20 years to have personally arranged. Beside her, scrubbed and solemn and bursting, Tom and Louisa and little Ned, who had insisted on carrying the ring on a cushion, and who took the office as seriously as a coronation, and who, when Clara appeared at the church door, forgot everything and announced to 60 people in the ringing voice of a 6-year-old. It grew back curly. It had. It fell now to her shoulders, chestnut with copper lights, and she wore no veil over it, only, holding back the curls on either side, a pair of tortoiseshell combs inlaid with tiny silver flowers, which the groom had kept for 2 years in the green box, and which he had sent up to her that morning with a note that said only, "They were always yours. Everything was always yours." Halfway down the aisle stood Mr. Pettigrew the wigmaker, in a new coat, next to Mr. Dunn the silversmith, both invited by name in the Duke's own hand, to the astonishment of the county and the complete understanding of everyone in the church. Mr. Pettigrew wept from the processional onward. "I sold the hair," he was heard explaining damply to his neighbor as though this required apology. "£20 of chestnut. It broke my heart." Mr. Dunn, being churchwarden proud, did not weep, but he polished his spectacles 11 times. At the back, in a good new dress of gray wool, sat a young woman who had once climbed through the dark with a stolen chain wrapped in a handkerchief, Betsy, now and henceforth lady's maid to the future Duchess of Wrexham, at a wage that had made her sit down suddenly when it was named. She had tried, once, to apologize again for the swapped cards. Clara had taken both her hands and said, "You carried my card next to your heart for 4 months when burning it was safer. We will not speak of the rest again. They never did." And there had come, that morning, one gift from a guest who did not attend. From Yorkshire by carrier, a great soft parcel, a wedding blanket of the finest wool in the West Riding, woven double, warm as a hearth, and pinned to it a card, in a hand as spare as its author. "Sound wool, sound match, J. Crane." Clara had laughed until she cried, and then cried a little for true, and the blanket lay across the foot of her marriage bed for the next 40 years. The service itself was short, as the best ones are. The vicar spoke. The vows were said Nathaniel steady until the very last words, which came out in the broken voice of the man in the Yorkshire parlor, and Clara's quiet and clear as a bell that has never had any crack in it at all. Little Ned surrendered the ring at the 3rd time of asking. Charlotte sobbed. Augusta permitted herself 2 tears, counted them, and stopped. Snow began to fall past the windows in fat, slow, theatrical flakes, as if the weather itself had been rehearsing. And then the register was signed, and they were man and wife. And there in the vestry, before the bells, before the breakfast, before the world got them back, came the moment this whole story has been traveling toward. "I have a wedding gift," said Clara. "It cannot wait for the hall." From Betsy she took a small parcel, plainly wrapped in brown paper, deliberately, exactly in brown paper, and put it into her husband's hands. Nathaniel looked at the wrapping and went very still, the way he had gone still at a ballroom staircase, at a lamplit study desk. Then he undid the string. Inside lay his father's gold watch. But not as he had carried it. The case gleamed, new-polished. The scratches of 6 decades had been eased and honored rather than erased, and fixed to it at the bow hung the silver chain, the asterisk chain, sturdy and plain, made for keeping something safe. Its 5 words worn faintly brighter now from 10 months of a man's thumb moving over them in his pocket. And the watch was ticking. She had done it all in secret over months, Betsy smuggling the watch from his dressing room, Dunn the silversmith fitting the chain with his own hands, and a master watchmaker brought from London who had opened the old case with the reverence of a surgeon and found the mainspring not broken after all. Only stopped. Only waiting all those years to be wound. Nathaniel held it to his ear like a boy. His eyes were shut. The little heartbeat of it filled the stone vestry, tick, 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 6 lost years catching up all at once. "You told me once," Clara said softly, "that time stopped for you the day your father died, that you were waiting for a reason to wind it again." She closed his fingers around the watch, chain and all, the way she had once closed another man's fingers around a ring, but this time to keep, this time forever. "Wind it every morning, my love. Time started again." The Duke of Wrexham, who had wept once in 6 years, alone, at 3 o'clock in the morning, wept for the 2nd time in front of his wife, his God and a vestry mirror, and never afterward was ashamed of it. Then he threaded the chain through his waistcoat, settled the watch in its pocket, anchored at last over his heart, took his Duchess's hand, and walked out of the little church into the falling snow and the roaring bells and the upturned, shining faces of the village, every one of whom had been paid no wage that day and had come anyway. At the lych gate the children pelted them with dried rose petals. Somewhere behind, Mr. Pettigrew could be heard sobbing openly on Mr. Dunn's shoulder. The snow came down like a blessing, only a blessing this time, with no shroud in it anywhere. And if, in all of England that Christmas Eve, there beat two happier hearts than the pair walking down through the churchyard, or three, counting the small gold one ticking against the Duke's ribs, history does not record where they were. Christmas Eve again. 7 years later or 8, the hall had grown careless about counting, having so many better things to count. Snow on the park, candles on the tree, glass and gold fires in the great hall of Wrexham where the whole business had begun. And on the hearthrug before the fire, in a flannel nightgown, negotiating fiercely for 10 more minutes before bed, sat a small girl of 5 with gray, serious eyes, and a head full of tumbling curls the color of chestnuts in October, copper lights and all, her grandmother's hair twice inherited, turning over and over in her small hands the most precious object she knew of in the world. Her father's gold watch. "And Papa winds it every morning," she recited, for the 100th time, because true stories must be told the same way every time, that is the law, because Mama made time start again. "Because Mama made time start again," the Duke of Wrexham agreed gravely, from the depths of his chair. "And the chain says the magic words." "Read them then." She could not read, not really, but she knew them the way one knows a prayer, and she traced the worn silver letters with one small finger. "To N every hour. Yours." C, she looked up, struck by an annual thought. N is you, and C is Mama, but Papa, I'm a C too. "So you are," said her father, Miss Charlotte Augusta, and he gathered her up, watch and all, while she shrieked. The room was full. It was always full now. Christmas Eve at Wrexham Hall, Aunt Charlotte and her boys, great-grandmama Augusta, 90 next summer and refusing, on principle, to die while things remained this interesting, asleep and smiling bolt upright in the best chair with a wolfhound's head in her lap. A long-legged 14-year-old named Ned, down from Yorkshire for the holidays as he was every year, teaching the Wrexham heir to cheat at cards. And moving through it all with a quiet that ran the whole house, Betsy, Mrs. Simmons now, having astonished everyone and most of all the butler, counting candles the way she counted every good thing twice. Of Lady Diana Fairfax the county had long since stopped speaking. She lived abroad Vienna, someone had said once, or was it Baden in that busy nowhere reserved for the disgraced, wintering from spa to spa on her father's grudging remittances, telling new acquaintances, who never stayed acquainted long, a story about a dukedom that had almost been hers. The county did not hate her. That was the terrible thing, Augusta observed with satisfaction. Hatred is remembering. The county had simply, entirely forgotten, and somewhere in a locked drawer of her own, Diana Fairfax knew it. Later the children carried up, the guests gone glowing to their rooms, the candles on the tree pinched out one by one. The Duchess of Wrexham sat at her dressing table brushing out her hair, long past her shoulders now, copper lights leaping in the candle flame, while the snow ticked softly at the windows. In the mirror she watched the door open behind her, watched her husband cross the room in his dressing gown, unhurried, a man with all the time in the world and a working watch to prove it. He took the brush from her hand and set it down. Then from the table he took the tortoiseshell combs, worn smooth now, 2 silver flowers gone dim with love, and slid them into her hair, one side and the other, exactly as their maker intended, and rested his hands on her shoulders, and met her eyes in the glass. "Happy Christmas, my oldest friend," he said. Down in the dark of the great hall, the tree stood silent over its heap of ribboned boxes and one small parcel wrapped by ducal tradition. None dared ask why, in plain brown paper. The old house settled. The snow came down like a blessing on Derbyshire. And through it all, faint and steady from the pocket of a waistcoat hung over a chair, anchored to it by a plain silver chain that had cost, once, everything a girl had, a small gold heart went on beating in the dark. Every hour yours and every Christmas hers. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.